Hello everyone, welcome to this video. In this video we're going to discuss how to organize Python code. So from this video on we'll start writing professional looking code. So to start with, I'm going to activate my environment. So if you remember in the first video, I put a link in the description below. We discussed on how to create an environment in Anaconda. So first I'll activate this environment. So now you can see that this environment is active. The NLP environment is now active. So I'm going to now start Python, but this time instead of typing just Python, I'm going to use another interactive mode which is called IPython. So if you don't have IPython, you can simply install it using pip install IPython. Or you could use Conda to install it. So Conda install, and you have to specify the channel Anaconda and IPython. So this will install IPython for you. And let me show you how IPython is. So first, let me start with Python. So as you can see with Python, we've seen this before with Python. So now let me show you how the IPython interface looks. So the IPython interface looks different. It has cells which are given numbers 1, and as you type, each cell will be given a certain number. So the good thing about using IPython is that it gives you functionality to other things. For example, you can still run commands in IPython by prefixing it with an exclamation mark. You can install other things. So you can even learn just other commands that you'd learn in Bash or any other shell. And the other thing that it allows you to save the code that you type. So in Python you can't save the code, but in IPython you can save the code after you run the interactive shell and you're happy with what you've done. You can save that information, which is a good thing. And I would encourage everyone to use IPython instead of the default Python. So I can even run commands just like I'm in the terminal when I'm using IPython, which is a very good thing. I don't have to switch between the Python interpreter and the terminal. I can easily run the commands here. So most of the things that we're going to cover here, we're going to use IPython. So in this video on organizing code, we're going to cover functions. So to start with, what are these functions? So if you can remember, in the previous video we discussed on how we can name values. For example, if we look at the program above, we can see how we assign a name to 25. We assign it rate. So now rate refers to 25. One other thing that we can do is we can give a name to a sequence of code, so that whenever we type the name, we can run all that code. And that's where the power of programming actually comes in, when we can name a block of code and we can run that block of code by just using a single name. We don't have to type all the code. Just a single name can run the code. So for example, we've looked at the print function before. So this print function is a name. It's a named sequence of code. Whenever I type print, it runs the code in the background. So for example, here if I type print hello, welcome, it prints that. So what's actually happening behind the scenes is that there's some code which is written under the print name, and that code is being run. And in this case, when that code runs, it shows whatever I give to it to print. And in programming, this is called passing an argument to a function. So this is referred to as an argument. So I've passed an argument to the print function, and the print function prints out something. So the other function that we looked at is converting a string to a float. So for example, we can say float 3.5, and this returns the number 3.5. So here we have, so this is different. We are passing in a string which represents a number, and this returns a number. So this is termed as a return value of this function. And when a function returns something, you can actually assign it a name. So if you look at this line of code here, line number 6, when we convert this to a float, we can actually give it to a number of hours. But the difference with print is that print doesn't return anything. It just shows it on the screen. So let me show you the difference here. So I say print hello. So it's printed out hello. But if we check X, we'll see that X doesn't have anything. It doesn't print anything. So in this case, print doesn't return any value. In other words, you could say that print returns a non-value. And let me show you the difference with float. I'll use the same name X, and I'll say X is equals to float 3.5. And when I do X, you see that X has a certain value. So this value is returned by the function. So that's just the lingua franca that we have to get used to. So let me just repeat. So here I'm passing a value to float, and float returns a value. That returned value, I give it the name X. So here I've printed out the return value of float. So you can see it's just this, but now as a number, not as a string. So there are several other functions that come preloaded in Python. Whenever I start Python, those names are variable. So they are names of sequences of code. So the other names that are not available that you can still use. But for you to be able to use those names, you need to import them. And when you import those names, then you can use those names. For example, if I say import math, then math is now available in this program. And because it's available, I can use it like this. So there's the name, and I just put a dot and the name of the function I want to use. So we'll get to this in more detail later. So let me just do this. And you see, this is the sign function that we learn in mathematics, and it gives me the value of that. The sign of 90 is that value. So that's one way we can have access to the names that are not available in Python. Ideally, what they do is when you open Python, it tries to give you most of the common names that you need, that almost every programmer will need in their program. For example, you have print, you have float, you have a number of names that are given to you. So that's how we can have access to other names. In this video, we're going to look at how to use def. So this is how we define a name for a sequence of instructions that the program has to run. So we just type def, and let me say I want to say hello. So I just go to print hello. So this is a simple function, and we just say print hello. So here you can see we used def to define a function. So we have that keyword which shows that we're about to define a function, and this is the name of the function. So how we define the function in Python is we use def, which is a keyword that tells Python that we're about to define a function. And that this function will give it the name hello, print hello. And the other thing that we see that's important when we define the function are these two brackets and a full colon at the end. So now we have a sequence of, here we just have one line of code that will be executed. So how do we actually run this function? So you can just use the name, but I'll show you what happens when you just type the name. So when you just type the name, it just tells you that this is a function, which is in the, and we'll look at what main is. And this function is called print hello. So here it doesn't actually run the function. To run the function, you have to put the brackets at the end. And this runs the function, and you see that it says hello. So you see these are two brackets at the end. So this is what actually causes the function to run. When Python sees the name of the function and two brackets at the end, then it knows that you want to actually run the function. And this is called calling the function. What we do here is called calling the function. So now we've called, so here we've called hello, print hello. And one thing that you see is that here we don't define anything. It doesn't take in anything, so you can't give it anything. So if I try to give it anything, to pass it any value, if I try to pass it any value, you see that it's going to cause an error. So here I'll give it a name. I'll just pass in a name. You see this causes an error because this function doesn't define an argument, so we can't pass in an argument. Let's try to define a function that has arguments. So I'll create the same print hello, and here I'll say the name of the argument. I'll just say its name, and here I'll say print hello, and also print the name. So now this function of defined an argument called name. So every time you call this function, you have to give it this argument. You have to give it some value. And this argument is called a position argument because it's sensitive to its position. So if I just type this without passing an argument, it's going to give an error. So the correct way to run this function is to give it an argument. So now I'll type in Mac as the argument, and you see now it works. It prints Mac. So you can give a function a number of position arguments. It shouldn't just be one. For example, let me now create a function that actually does something. A function that adds two numbers. So I'll just say adds numbers, and I'll call the first number X, the second number Y. And we can access these arguments, the names that we give you, we can access them inside the function. And we could say we could say Z is equals to X plus Y. So whatever value is passed in this function, the first value will be given a name of X, and the second value will be given a name of Y. And here what we're doing now is we are adding X and Y and giving it the name Z. And so we could, if we want, we could print this Z. Or the best thing that we can do is just to return it. So I've added a new word here. So the new word that we've added is return. So this is how Python knows that it has to give out this value. So we specify the value that we want this function to return. We want it to return z, and we know that z is just the sum of x and y. So there we go. So now let's use this function adds num. Let's call it. So we pass it 2 arguments. We pass it 2 and 6. Then let's run. Now we hit enter. We see that the return value is shown here, which is 8. So what really went on here? So when we pass it 2 is assigned the name x, and 6 is assigned a name y. So now x plus y, which is 2 plus 6, gives it 8, and this 8 is returned. Every time we call this function, Python will go to this definition, and it will run this line by line. It will run this line first, then it will run this line, and it will give us the value back. Here it gave us back 8. And we can do this. We can pass in different arguments now. For example, let me say 10 and 20, and it will give me 30. So I can give it any values that I please, and it will do that. So every time the first value is given the name x, and the second value is given the value y. So remember this function, if we just call it without giving it anything, it will give us an error. So here you can see that it's missing the 2 required position arguments, and it's giving us these arguments are x and y. So let's write the same function, but this time we'll also add some. We'll make y an option argument by making it a named argument. So we'll say def adds nums, and we'll keep x the way it was, but to make y a named argument or a keyword argument. How do we do that? So we just assign it some value, some default value, say 10. And now we have, we can say z is equals to x plus y, and then we are returning z. So the shortcut to writing this code, we can just we may not need to assign it to anything because we're just returning it as it is. So we can just say return x plus y. So what will happen? The function first add x and y and then return it. So now with this position argument, with this named argument that we've added, we've given it a default value of 10. What that means is that if we don't give this function 2 arguments, it's going to take y will have its default value, which is 10. So let me show you. So it says adds nums, and here we'll just give it one number. Let's say 7. You see that it prints 17 because y has a default value of 10. So this works where you need some argument to have a default value if no value is given. So if now I give it 2 arguments, let me say 4 and 3, you see that now the answer is not 14, but the answer is 7 because it uses this argument that we've passed to the function. And the other thing that we could, the other way we can call this function is just to say we can actually use like x is equals to 5 and y is equals to, let's say, 15. So now here we are specifying what each value takes. We say x will take the value 5 and we say y will take the value 15. So this is just another way that you can call a function, that you can use for calling a function. You can give specific names to the arguments when you call them. So that's it about functions. And as you can see, this becomes very powerful because we give a certain name to a function. So remember when we started, I mentioned that we can import something to use it in our program. The same thing here, we can also import this program that we wrote, which is getting started. And let me just show you what happens. I'll import getting started. You see, as soon as I import that, it asks me to enter the number of hours. So let me say 10, and it prints out Mark and the salary for Mark. So if you remember, what we did with this program was that we assumed that there's an employee named Mark who gets a certain rate of salary per hour, say $25 per hour. But for us to calculate the actual salary, we need to ask the user to enter the total number of hours this person worked in the month. You see, as soon as I import this, it actually runs the whole program and prints everything. So this is a bad way of writing a program, because usually we want to reuse the programs. So if when you import it, it runs immediately, then imagine it's a very big file and the program takes hours to finish. Then importing it would run the whole thing. You have to wait for all those hours. So one way that we have to organize our programs, and this we should do always, is that we should try to define our programs we organize our programs in functions to decide how we run the program. So if it's imported, we don't want to run everything. If it's run directly, we want to actually run the program. And we do this by organizing this in terms of our functions. So we'll just define a generic name main. So this is actually used in most programs. So it's just generic name. So I'll just indent everything like that. So now if I run this program, nothing will run because now everything is under the function, so it won't run. So how we run it is by taking advantage that when you type Python and the name of the file, that file is given the name main. So I'll just type that. We haven't yet covered if statement, but for now just take it as it is. We're going to cover it in the next video. So we can now call the function main. And you see now that I'm running it as main, it checks the name, and if the name matches main, which is the name that we have here, then it's going to run that function main. And now you see it asks me to enter the number of hours, and I enter 250, and that's good. And let's see now in IPython how that would work. So now I'm going to import getting started, and you see now it doesn't run this function because now the name of that is not main. So as we saw, the name is getting started, so it doesn't match main. That's why we see it doesn't run anymore. So now we can run it at will, and just though we did math.sign, we can do the same. But here the function that we have here is main, and we can do that. And you see now it runs and enter. So that's how we organize Python programs. And now we can actually organize some of the functionality in this program to functions. For example, we can say this the salary calculator, we can actually create a separate function here. We can just call it a calculator. and we say that it takes 2 arguments, because to calculate the salary you need the rate and you also need the number of hours. And we say this will return the rate times the number of hours. And now where we have this calculation here for salary, we can actually put a calculator like so. And since we have position arguments, we just separate them like that. So we put a comma to separate the 2 position arguments. So the rate will be handed over to rate, and number of hours will have the name number of hours, and this will calculate and return that value. When that value is returned, we give it a name of salary, and here we use the name salary. So how the program will actually run is, depending on how we run that. So let me say we run it using Python. So what it's going to do is, the first time it goes through, because everything is in a function, it will just import this math, and then it will continue. It will find this definition of a function and another function. And the only code that's outside this function is this code here. And it will try to run this code here. So it's going to check the name, and then it will see that this name matches main if we run it this way. And then it's going to call this function now main. So once it calls this function, it will jump back to this point. It will enter this function here, and then it will run this command, and it will go in sequence. That command, it will ask someone to enter the number of hours, and then it will enter this try block, and then it will convert those numbers to hours, and then it will call calculator. At this point, it's going to call calculator, and once it calls calculator, the program will jump now here, and then it's going to run this. It's going to do the calculation first. Once it finishes the calculation, it's going to run the return, which returns this. And once it hits this return, it's going to jump back to this program now. So once it jumps back here, it puts in whatever value it calculated here. And then it will assign it the name salary. So whatever value which comes from calculator will be given the name salary. And then the program will continue here and here. So it's important that you understand how the interpreter actually runs the code. So you can see that it does this jumping depending on when you call a function. When you call the function, it will go to the function itself and run all the programs in that function. And when it hits the return statement, it will go back to where it was called. So in this case, it was called in line 17. It will return that value to line number 17, and it will continue down running. So that's it concerning functions. If you have any questions, comments, please write them in the comment below. And in the next video, we're going to cover how to actually do the styling, how we can write beautiful code in Python. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. So, and turn on the bell notification so you can receive the alerts when I upload the next video. So see you in the next video.